Holly. Holly, it is so nice to have you here. And at this point, I'm going to just remind everybody that as a follow-up to this presentation, we will have a second presentation in person to address some of your progress. And that would be on February 16th in person here at the North Chatham Library. And you'd have to do a second registration for that. Also, would like to remind everybody that the materials provided by the North Chatham Library, including that handout, the slide presentation, and the recording, are the intellectual property of Holly MacCammon. Permission to use these materials has been given to the library. Any sharing or duplicating of these materials is expressly prohibited. Holly, I'd like you to turn everything over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen now. So I'm going to get a confirmation from you that everyone can see it. So Vicki, could you just unmute and confirm that everyone can see the slideshow?
You can see it. It looks wonderful.
Okay, great. All right, so thank you, Vicki, and hello to all of our participants. My name is Holly MacCammon, and I am presenting this webinar on some basics about genealogy to help you with your research. To begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I have a library science degree from St. John's University and a certificate in genealogical research from the Genealogy Studies program at Boston University. And I started my genealogy business in 2018. I've been researching my own family history for 30 years and can trace a number of my family lines here in the United States back to the 1650s. In New York State, I have ancestors who migrated here from New England in the early 1800s. I also have some Columbia County roots. One set of my great-great-grandparents immigrated here from Ireland and settled in Hudson in the 1880s. Okay, I'm just having a little problem with my screen, so just give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, so this webinar is focusing on online collections and websites that can assist you with your genealogical research. It will be broken down into 3 parts. The first part will cover the steps to take before beginning your research. In the second part, I will discuss the best types of records to look for. And in the third part, I will let you know where on the internet you can find record collections. There is a handout that accompanies this presentation, which contains web links covering all the topics that I will be discussing. So the first thing you want to do is talk to your family members. The first person I reached out to was my grandmother. She and my aunt gave me copies of their records and photos to help me get started. I asked my grandmother and my aunt questions about the items and generally about our family history. Once you receive items from family members, you want to make sure that you have digital copies and backups. With hard copy items, make sure to create digital copies of everything you have. With any digital copies of items you collect, you want to make sure that they're not just saved on your computer. You also want to have backup copies that can be saved on a thumb drive, through a cloud service, or on a file share website. So you've gotten to the point where you've talked to your family and you've gotten documents, photographs, and information that can help you start your family story. Now you want to begin to fill in your family tree. One option is to use templates to begin to track your ancestors' important events and dates. On the internet, you can find downloadable templates, primarily of 3-generation and 6-generation family tree templates in Word, Excel, or PDF formats. Nowadays, most people prefer to create their family trees on a genealogy website. The top websites are Ancestry, Family Search, MyHeritage, and Find My Past. If you would like to select one of these sites, but haven't done so yet, there is a helpful blog article which compares the attributes of each website, which I have included in the handout. When you start to research collections, it's important to focus on finding records that can best verify the information and documentation you have already collected. These include census records, vital records, newspaper collections, military records, probate records, church records, immigration records, and even deeds and mortgages as a part of land record collections. What is crucially important is the ability to place ancestors in a specific location during a specific time. Being able to document where an ancestor lived and when they lived there can aid in targeting additional collections to research. Some of the best records to accomplish this are federal census records. The US government started conducting the census in 1790, and they are available for genealogical research through 1950, with the exception of the 1890 census, which was mostly destroyed by fire. The example I have on the slide is from the 1930 census and shows the household of my great-grandparents, Tom and Winnie Keegan, who lived in Germantown here in Columbia County at the time the census was taken. This particular census provides ages for each household member, their relationship to the head of the household, and their marital status. One important thing to note is the number in the far right-hand column, which you can see in the close-up of the record on the slide. The number 26 represents the age my great-grandparents were when they were married. This clue helped me to locate and obtain a copy of their marriage record. In between federal censuses, there were some states, including New York, that conducted their own censuses. New York State census records can be particularly helpful in terms of specifying the county of birth for those born in New York State. For those born outside of New York, either the state or the country of birth was indicated. The census record shown on the slide is from the 1875 New York State Census and shows the household of my third great-grandparents, Peter and Ellen Keegan, who resided in Red Hook, Dutchess County at the time. This record provides evidence that both Peter and Ellen were born in Ireland, and all three of their children were born in Dutchess County. This information also tells us that Peter and Ellen were living in Dutchess County as early as 1860, based upon the age of their eldest child. From census records, we move on to government-issued birth, marriage, and death certificates, also known as vital records, which mainly date back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. If you remember when we looked at the 1930s federal census, I showed you the record for Tom and Winnie Keegan, which gave a clue as to the age they were married. Based on that information, I was able to find and obtain a copy of their marriage record, which reveals even more clues about my family. You will notice that their ages are a little off. It says 24 on the marriage record. It was 26 on the census record. You will find that that happens pretty frequently, and you will need to keep an open mind concerning conflicting information provided by our ancestors over the years. There are a variety of reasons for these small discrepancies, but that is definitely a topic for another time. So getting back to the marriage record, it also identifies Tom and Winnie's birthplaces, as well as identifying their parents' names and places of birth. The availability of government-issued birth, marriage, and death records varies from state to state. A link to a guide for determining the availability of vital records is available in the handout. So for those of us with New York State ancestors, I'm including some special tips. New York did not require the recording of vital records on the town and/or county level until 1880. And in some counties, it didn't occur on a regular basis until several years later. It should also be noted that most New York State vital records are not available online. What is available online are the indexes to birth, marriage, and death records. These indexes will tell you where the birth, marriage, or death took place. If you find an ancestor through one of these indexes, I highly recommend that you try to obtain records through the town clerk's office where the event took place and not submit requests to the New York State Department of Health in Albany. The turnaround time for requests to the state are extremely long. Some record requests can take a year or more to be fulfilled. In contrast, requesting records through the town clerk can take as little as a couple of weeks. For pre-20th century research, if you are lucky enough to have ancestors from New England, town records are a valuable resource, which provide a wealth of information on places and dates for births, marriages, and deaths. These records can date back to the mid-1600s and were recorded by town governments through the mid-1900s. Another source of pre-20th century vital records that can document an ancestor's birth, marriage, and death is church records. Researching these record collections can be a bit hit or miss, though, because they are not really centralized and can be found in a variety of formats in a variety of places. Cemetery headstones documented in digital photos through online memorial websites not only provide the date of an ancestor's death, but may also document the ancestor's age at death, which can be used to calculate a birth date. In some cases, gravestones may also identify spouses. Inscriptions of cemetery gravestones have been compiled in published and unpublished book format since the 19th century and can provide supplemental information that might not have been documented online, either because a cemetery's gravestones have not been fully photographed, or the older gravestones may have deteriorated and are unreadable. Newspapers are another source that may provide evidence to assist in research through birth and marriage announcements, notices of divorce, as well as obituaries and funeral notices. Newspapers can also provide interesting information that can enrich an ancestor's life story. To use some examples from my own family history, this slide shows a political cartoon of my second great-grandfather, Clarence Chapman, who was the chairman of a legislative committee on agriculture and irrigation in Colorado. It appears from the image that people may not have been too happy with his performance. I also found a number of articles on a murder trial that involved my great-great-uncle. I also found a notice that another one of my second great-grandfathers killed a bear while out hunting deer in the Adirondack Mountains. And I also found a marriage announcement for Tom and Winnie Keegan. I showed you their marriage certificate a little earlier in the slideshow. Some of the little details that the marriage certificate did not provide was that the wedding dinner was held at Winnie's parents' house. Tom and Winnie honeymooned in New York City, and after they returned, they had plans to reside in the town of Tivoli. Published genealogies are sometimes overlooked because they do not provide information on the records the author researched to obtain family information. However, these works can be used to further support evidence you already have, or at the very least, published genealogies might provide you with clues to advance your research. Probate is the process by which an individual's property and personal possessions are inventoried and distributed. Records associated with probate cases are most commonly found in the town or county where your ancestor died. Probate records can include the names of heirs and family members, guardians assigned to care for underage children, the deceased residence place and death date, an inventory of personal property, and names of witnesses and executors. Military records can also be a valuable tool in genealogy research. If you have an ancestor who was in service, these records can provide basic detail about the serviceman. Records associated with early wars, such as the Civil War and the American Revolution, can provide interesting insights and unexpected details. Immigration and naturalization records provide a record of an individual's travel and application for U.S. citizenship. These collections include passenger ship logs, border crossing records, and naturalization applications. Pre-20th century records typically don't contain as much detail as more recent collections, but they can still provide information that may assist in your research. On the other hand, 20th century immigration and naturalization records can be very detailed and can provide birth date and birthplace, last residence and country of origin, names of family members. In some cases, photographs are included, date of arrival in the United States, and ports of entry in the US. Also, the name of the ship in which the person traveled. Land records are an important resource because they document more ancestors than any other type of record, not only documenting purchases of land, but also the inheritance of land, potentially listing heirs. In cases where a married person sold property, both the husband and the wife's names will generally appear, and the marital status will be, the marital relationship will be stated. To assure clear title to a new buyer, the seller was required to document the chain of title back to the original owner, which could identify family relationships associated with prior land ownership. In some cases, if a purchaser of land has recently moved to the area, the record may also provide evidence as to the purchaser's prior residence. The publishing of county history books was very popular in the 1880s and 1890s. You can also find out a lot of very useful information about how your early ancestors lived by reading the historical sketches and summaries in these books. Sometimes, if your ancestor was an original settler in a particular area, a county history might even mention them and their family if they did something instrumental in the founding of the area, such as being a local official or establishing a church or a school. So now that you have an idea of the best records to research, where can you find these records? I'm going to start with two of the largest genealogy websites that have collections covering all of the types of records we've just reviewed. First is Family Search. Their website is free, but requires that you create an account. Once you do, you can use the site's primary search page to find records. Through their historical images database, you can explore records that have been digitized but not indexed. You can build your own family tree and view other people's trees. You can have access to Family Search's collections catalog, which has information on genealogical publications, microfilm collections, and other types of materials that are either available online through the Family Search Library in Salt Lake City or through the library's network of research centers. Finally, the site has a research wiki, which is a genealogy resource guide that can be searched by topic or location. The largest and most popular genealogy website is Ancestry.com. The site does have a limited number of record collections that can be viewed for free. However, most of the collections can only be viewed by purchasing a subscription. This site allows researchers to explore records by searching for a specific ancestor, by location, and by type. You can also review other subscribers' family trees, access the site's online collections catalog, which includes record collections that may not be available through the site's main search page because they have not been electronically indexed. Other genealogy websites that have a broad range of record collections include MyHeritage, which is a site with an online database that contains over 6 billion historical records, including census records, vital records, military records, and immigration records, along with historical newspaper collections. Find My Past. This is a website that hosts billions of searchable records of census, directory, and historical record information. The New England Historic Genealogical Society has a website called American Ancestors, which has over 1 billion records and includes one of the most extensive online collections of early American genealogical records. The New York Genealogical and Biographical Society's website has collections of digitized genealogy records and the names of over 1 million New Yorkers. There are a few websites dedicated to providing links to genealogy resources, including Cindy's List of Genealogy Sites on the Internet, which is a website with categorized lists of over 300,000 web links for genealogical research. Linkpendium is a resource directory to everything on the web about family history with relevant information about US states and counties. The Ancestor Hunt website has links to free online genealogy collections. There are a number of websites that have information on the availability of newspapers, as well as digital image of newspaper collections. The Library of Congress's Chronicling America website contains digitized newspapers and a newspaper directory to find information about American newspapers published from 1690 to the present day. Newspapers.com is an extensive database that provides online access to historical newspapers from nearly 60 locations in the US and worldwide. Genealogy Bank has one of the largest collections of digitized US newspapers dating back to 1690. The site also offers other online genealogy resources, including the Social Security Death Index, obituaries, and historical books. The New York State Historic Newspapers Project provides free online access to a wide range of the state's newspapers. Old Fulton, New York Postcards, also known as FultonHistory.com, is a website of over 1,000 New York newspapers, along with collections from other states and Canada. This final slide on where to find records includes the Internet Archive and the Halfley Trust Digital Library websites, which provide free public access to millions of digitized published works, including family genealogies and county histories. Find a Grave is a popular website with an online database containing millions of gravestone images. Fold3 is a website with an online database of indexed and digitized military records, including service records, documents, and draft cards. So the handout provided to you lists all of the websites I have summarized, plus provides resources specific to research of Columbia County ancestors, interview questions to ask relatives, digitally storing your documentation, family tree templates, online family trees, and reference guides for vital records, town records, and church records. Oh, sorry, there we go. And as a bit of a final research advice, before you sit in front of your computer to conduct research, make sure you set a specific research goal, whether it be finding out where an ancestor was born, who their parents were, or identifying a spouse. Make sure you have an objective in mind, and be sure to stay focused. It is very easy to go down the intranet rabbit hole when you are doing online research. If you find something interesting that wasn't quite what you were looking for, make a note of it and keep to your research goal. Keep a log or a list of the websites you go to, the collections you look at, and make sure you note all of the information a record contains. Even if you feel it isn't relevant, at some point it might end up being an important clue for further research. And finally, here's a little information about the services I provide. I offer research advice and guidance through coaching sessions and consultations, which I can do either over the phone or via Zoom. I conduct both online and repository research, and I teach research skills. You can find me on the web at genealogybyholly.com, and my Facebook business page is facebook.com/researchyourroots. So that concludes the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Holly. It's wonderful. I don't know. I have mostly in our Q&A is things about the handout, which I did finally get over into the right section.
Oh, okay, great.
Yes. Francisco raised a hand, and I am going to find him. Francisco? Francis? It's
Francis.
Francis.
Francis, hi, how are you?
We're good.
I'm an older person, so a lot of my relatives are no longer living. What would you suggest? How do I start? Like, I have some details about my mother and father, but not a whole lot.
Okay, what I've suggested is start looking in census records for them. Whatever information you do have on them, you know where they lived at a certain time period. If you
Yes.
know, that you can start looking with census records. That's the best place to start, because then that can give you information that you can use to search other collections and find out more about them.
Okay, all right. Thank you. That's very helpful.
I have a question here from Barbara is asking if you would elaborate a bit more on how to store or file the documents you found.
Well, I mean, like I said, you can use, not just have it on your hard drive, but you can use a thumb drive. You can use a lot that I have Microsoft 365 with my computer, and it has something called OneDrive, which is sort of an automatic cloud system where all of my documents are automatically saved up in a cloud, or the file sharing systems, which are like Google Docs or Dropbox. I've included some links to those in the handout that I have.
So do you just do one page after another, write a document with like, Lois Arnold's name on it, and then all the things that you think of underneath her, and then store that?
Well, there's a variety of things that I do. Like when I first look at an individual, I like to I'm a big fan of Microsoft Excel. So I create an Excel sheet that, and I analyze all of the documents that I know about for that individual. And, each piece of information that document tells me. So I'll be able to, come up with birth information, marriage information, death information, their children, like, census records will show households with children. Whatever documentation that individual has, I kind of collect onto one Excel spreadsheet so I can sort of get an overview of who that person is. And sometimes I'll even, in a Word document, create a timeline for someone. And there are certain assumptions that you can make based upon what you find in records. One of the examples I gave before with the 1875 New York State Census, I knew that Peter and Ellen Keegan, had been living in Dutchess County at least since 1860 because of the birth of their eldest child, the birth year of their eldest child. So you can kind of get clues about people when you really kind of put the information together.
And Robin was actually asking if you talked more about the state census records.
Talk more about them?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Well, they happened in between the federal censuses. They're available for the most part. The 19th century ones, 1855, 1865, 1875, and there are a couple that happened in the early 20th century, but the ones that are in the 19th century that can be the most helpful, just because New York State didn't ask for vital records from towns until 1880. So any information, any documentation you can find from the 19th century that will give you ages to anticipate or calculate birth dates, places of birth, like I mentioned, if someone was born in New York State, the New York State Census records will show the county in which they were born. And then they have some really, like, each census record has some unique information. Like sometimes New York State Census records will, ask how long that family has lived in that town. So you can kind of get an estimate of when they may have moved there. So you can look for land records, or, you can, there are just a variety of things that you can do. And that's why it's so important at every record you look at, you make sure you write down all the detail, and then you can, like I said, I put in an Excel spreadsheet, and then I can, kind of put together a timeline for someone and make some assumptions based on the images, the information that I found. But the state census records are really valuable, and each one of them has little unique questions they asked that can help you with your family history.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up to that too. So in the Excel sheet, what would be some of the headings that you would be recording these things under?
Well, what I would do is, I have the individual, and then I have across in the columns would be the type of, or the document type, whether it was a census record, a birth record, whatever, and then the year that that occurred. You have another column, and all of the information that you have in the documents you can create as a column heading for that particular individual. And then if you have the years of those documents in that column, then what you can do later is you can kind of sort things. So you can kind of get a chronological, if you don't do it in chronological order, you can get a chronological idea of what that person's life was like and the information you have about them during those time periods.
Thank you. Susan Tanner has a question. Did I just give you? Susan, you could talk, I think.
Yep.
I don't know how to, I'm not very good at doing this, but okay, I think I figured it
doing
out. So
fantastic.
I have all these crazy, can you hear me, or
Yes.
is this okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I have boxes. I mean boxes I've been sorting through for years of mostly my father's family. And purportedly his father, my grandfather, was a pilot in World War I. But however, there was sort of the Hatfields and McCoys going on, I guess. So they didn't really keep much track of my grandfather. And I've only Googled his name, but other sites, like you mentioned, Fold3 website, are there other military sites that I could look like him up with his name?
Well,
The other is,
Fold-
this is also kind of, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that Fold3 is kind of the one that's almost exclusively military, but you are going to find military records on Ancestry and through Family Search. And now if he was a pilot, it probably would have been World War II, not World War I, right?
I think it was World War One, because
Wow,
the
then he
family
was like,
story is that he flew General Pershing around as his pilot or something. But this is all kind of crazy stuff. But yeah, so he would have been, and I've penciled some stuff in and dates. So, oh my gosh, my grandfather died in the 50s. And I think he was kind of old when he had my dad, whatever. But I've got all these crazy things I'd like to connect together. And I think starting with that end of the family, his military record would be interesting if I could find it. And of course, you're just telling me about this Fold3. I didn't know where to begin, other than all the papers I've gone through. And does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to specifically find his military record, then but Fold3 is a subscription site, so you would need to, need to subscribe to it. Family Search might have some military records, and they're free, but
okay.
Yeah.
Curious, and then excuse me, and then his I've got really crazy family stories, and it's taken me years to kind of piece things together, and I'm really barely delved into it. But my step grandmother also flew planes, supposedly not in the military, but I've looked at some of the websites for women pilots in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and I can't find her name either. But maybe she was just a hobby pilot. That's just one of the, my parents never talk about this stuff. So
have you tried looking in newspapers?
Pardon?
In newspaper collections, because if she was a female pilot in the 20s or 30s, that would probably be something of note. And she might end up, I mean, if you knew where she lived.
Yeah, it probably wasn't. Let me think. Okay, so it probably was more like the 40s and 50s.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, okay, so newspapers, I got to keep going through all these boxes of things and see if there's anything that notes that. But between the Hatfields and McCoys, so to speak, no disrespect intended, but there's not much on my father's side other than, anyway,
Have you looked at
I'm
census?
sorry.
Seriously, like if the first thing you want to do if you're looking online to be able to piece your family together is to try to find them in census records.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that instead of keep going through all these darn boxes I've got. And I, kind of like put some things away and then I throw some things away that look unimportant. And I've got little pieces put together. But yeah, okay, thank you. This is very helpful. I just need to kind of hunker down and do it.
Focus.
Right?
Focus is important.
Focus. Right.
Thank you, Susan.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
We have a couple questions that have to do with Europe. One specifically Lithuania, but how to get some records from Europe. And also related to that about the Holocaust and Eastern European Jewish ancestry. I just sort of put those all in together, and possibly Elizabeth is also going to ask a question about that.
Okay, well, I can say that my background is mostly in US stuff, but I do have a little bit of Ireland, a little bit of Germany, a little bit of Canada, a little bit of Scotland. I've never really researched Eastern Europe. What I would recommend, which is always very helpful when there's a topic that I don't know about, the first thing that I do is I go to that family search wiki that I mentioned before. At familysearch.org, one of the options that they have on their main screen, on their main pull down menu, is the research wiki. And if you use that, you can search for any sort of topic and what genealogical records might exist or resources that might exist. It will have web links to help you do your research.
Great, Holly. Thank you so much. I guess that answers my question. I've been trying to research my Eastern European Jewish ancestry and great paper trails once they hit the United States. But prior to that, it's been a little, I haven't gotten a lot of information. So
yeah, that's typical. And I think, and again, I don't have really a background in it, but if someone asked me about it, as a research client, if they had a line of their family that had that similar sort of thing, I would go to Family Search and look it up and see, okay, so what are the best resources to be able to learn more about how to research family through the Holocaust and a family who went through that, and Eastern Europe in the 1930s and 40s, which is just incredibly difficult to try to find documentation. I can tell you that much. I know.
Sure. And I think for me, what's been most helpful is death certificates. Contain a lot of information, and then Ancestry and Family Search have been incredible. Once you connect to the records, it can auto-populate back for you if that person's already been connected. So thank you, North Chatham Library, for having this.
Very welcome. Lisa has a question about how do I find an address through school records?
How do you find an address through school? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Let's see if we can find Lisa. If I can find Lisa, we'll ask her to, oh, there she is. Lisa, can you ask that question?
Oh, there she is.
No, she go to the top. Lisa?
Oh, yes.
You can talk and ask your question again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm trying to find the New York City address. My great-great-grandparents lived when my great-grandma was born. I have her baptismal record, believe it or not, from 1886. I went to the church and they said that back in that time, they did not ask for an address of record. So I was stuck, and they did suggest that I try to find the home address through school records.
Well, I mean, I hate to keep going back to census records, but if it was a census record around like 1900 or something, it might vary, and particularly in New York City, it might have their address.
Okay, so she was born in 1886. The 1890 census is no good.
Right.
So that brings us up to, another 10 years later, she was already 14. And that's not going to really necessarily tell me where they lived when she was actually born.
Have you
That's-
tried looking at city directories?
What do you mean by city directories?
City directories were like kind of before telephone books. They were they
okay.
were like directories of people. They didn't have phones, so they just, they would just list everybody in alphabetical order and have their addresses and their occupations. And I know there are city directories for New York City out there.
Okay, any idea how I could access it?
Well, the first thing I would do, again, I would go to Family Search and I would look up New York City. And because they have, when you look at the wiki pages for a particular location, it will give you all sorts of different kind of categories of records to look for, like kind of like the record types I was explaining tonight. One of those record types are city directories. And they should have something in there on that page. Other than that, maybe the New York Public Library has a really big genealogy collection. And the name of the collection is escaping me right now. I think it's the Milstein collection. They might have some information. They might even have something digitally, the New York Public Library. I'm just trying to think, maybe the New York Historical Society. But first I would check Family Search to see, look for New York City and then city directories, or Manhattan and then city directories, and see what they, I'm sorry.
I beg your pardon, I'm sorry.
No.
The city directories, would they have any people in there that just had businesses? Because these were very, they were not people of means. They lived in a tenement. They would, a name would still be possibly listed in there.
Absolutely. I have relatives who are in city directories who were painters and, just all sorts of like blue collar workers. And, so yeah, it included everybody. It was how people knew how to find people before there were phone books, before there were phones, so they would have these city directories. So yeah, I would absolutely give it a shot.
Okay. And back to the school records, any idea if that would turn up anything from back in that day in New York City?
It's, I've never really looked up school records before. I've done projects where I've looked at school yearbooks. The only experience I have with in that sort of thing with children and records is like, orphan asylums where you might find information about orphans, case files and stuff like that. I've never really looked at school records. And I don't know. I'm just really not familiar with the archival stuff that might be available for schools. But I think, again, if your search leads you to the New York Public Library and their genealogy division, if you ask them some questions, they might be able to help you with that if you knew the school or at least the neighborhood.
Okay, fair enough. And I just wanted to say that was a really great idea that you threw out there about creating a Excel spreadsheet. That's brilliant.
That helps me all the time.
That helps. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Lauren has a question about specific sites for family members lost in the Holocaust and World War II.
Yeah, again, I have to lead people back to Family Search. Their wiki resource pages just provide a lot of information on various topics and locations and the resources that are available, the collections that are available, web links to all sorts of places on the internet. And Cindy's List also would probably have that kind of material as well. So, I would go to, one of those sources to try to find information on a specific topic. I would go to Family Search or Cindy's List.
I have two more questions here, Holly, for you. This is from Deborah. Any thoughts about how to reconstruct immigration from Scotland to Canada in the mid-19th century? According to my cousin, the town he traced our great-great-grandfather to lost all their records in a fire. We want to figure out where in Scotland he came from.
Wow, 19th century immigration is really tough. My last name is MacCammon and it's Scottish, and that Scottish line actually were in Canada in the 19th century, and they came from Scotland. So I'm right there with you. And I was able to find some information about them in Canada, my family in Canada, through census records. There isn't a lot in terms of immigration. The Archives of Canada might have some information on 19th century immigration, and I'm trying to think of another place that I've looked. That would be I'm sorry, the Archives of Ontario. The Archives of Ontario will have some information. Assuming that that's where they came to in Canada. I don't know where. Did they go from Scotland to Ontario?
Shit. Is anybody there?
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, hey.
Yes, I can.
Okay. I suspect that he might have gone to Ontario because they ended up in Chicago.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. The Archives of Ontario has a very good website, and they do have some collections, some immigration collections that are online there. I don't know if you've looked at Canadian census records. They have those. I think they have the family search. I know they have them on Ancestry. That might be able to help you trace them. It won't tell you where they're from, though.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to know where the family came from. My family came from in Scotland, because there were some other people on Ancestry, other subscribers who had the same family line, who I communicated with, and they gave me some outside information, so I knew what part of Scotland they had come from. So I would try the Archives of Ontario first to start out, and the Canadian census records to see if you can pull together some more information.
Okay, thank you. And then I thought I'd try to see if I could figure out his birth date, because I know his name, and then figure out who was born in that year in Scotland. And I did a little bit of that through Ancestry and came up with, my last name's Bell, so it's pretty common.
Oh yeah.
Came up with about 15 Alexander Bells born in a particular year.
Oh man. Okay. Yeah. No. I mean, what you really need to do is you need to find as many records as you can in the U.S., then as many records as you can in Canada, and piece all of the information together to try to help you, to identify, what his birth year might be.
Right.
And I've used Scotland's People. That's a really good website for Scottish research, but you kind of have to know as much about a person as humanly possible before you go and do that. But so that would be my advice.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Holly?
Yes.
Elle would like to know if, she says, one side of my family immigrated to Canada from Ireland. Then about 20 years later, they moved to New York State. Do you have any experience with ancestry records in Canada? I know that Quebec is one of the places they lived. I know you've already touched on this, but.
Yeah, I mean, what time period was this?
Elle?
It was around the 1880s.
Okay. Yeah, again, immigration records in the 19th century are really, really, really tough. They didn't even start keeping track of people until like maybe 1850. And then everything from 1850 up until 1906 is like very scattered and very little information about individuals. It wasn't until after 1906 there was some law passed or something. So there was a lot more information that was gathered about people who immigrated to the country. What you can do is Ancestry has this, and I know they have border crossings, but it's from like the 1890s. They started tracking people who crossed the border from Canada into the United States. So if that's a time period that kind of works for you, you might be able to find them that way.
Thank you. And yeah, actually, I just redid the math and I realized my great grandmother was born in 1856 in Quebec. and they moved to the United States in 1870. So that was during that earlier period.
Yeah, yeah. What you could do is just sort of like follow them through census records. That's, and I don't think you would find any specific, you probably won't find any specific records relating to when they crossed over. But if you gather as many records in Quebec and the US and New York as you can during that time period, you can kind of put together maybe an approximate time period that they may have come into this country.
Thank you.
Sure.
But I have, I think, 2 questions here still. This is a response to the school records. Frances knew that her mother went to school in the Inwood section of Manhattan. So she called a couple of schools and found my mother's record. Plus they had her photo. Oh my goodness.
Well, what time period was this?
Let me see. Frances, we spoke to her a moment ago.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, I'm trying to think. My mom was born in 1917. So it had to be, I want to say, and she was married in 1941. So I want to say maybe the 30s. She must have gone to school in the 30s.
Yeah, I would say that if you're dealing with, mid 20th century school records, you're probably going to find a lot of information. They've been putting a lot of yearbook information online now.
Right.
But if it's like, 1880s, 1890s, 1900, that might be a little bit difficult. The more you get into the 20th century, the easier that kind of research is going to be.
Yeah, it was so exciting to find this because my mother was orphaned due to the Spanish flu. Her mother died on the anniversary of the ending of the war, the World War I, but she never talked much about it. And then her father died 10 months later, and he was a New York City policeman. So apparently there was a big hoop-de-doo and argument between the 2 grandmothers, the patriarchal and the matriarchal grandmothers. And it was in the newspapers. So I remember my mom telling me about that. And when I called the New York City Police Department to get more info about my grandfather, the museum's collection, apparently there'd been a big fire and they lost a lot of records going back to that time, which is kind of sad.
Well, there's an 1890s, what some people use to reconstruct the 1890 census is there was actually a policeman census that was done in 1890, but I don't think that's the right time period for you.
No, because my grandmother, my mother's mother died October 11th. The war ended, I think, 1918. My mother was 10 months old.
Okay, so, and then you said that there was sort of a conflict between both the grandparents on who should get custody of her?
Right. So it ended up that my mother's mother, her great grandmother, was able to get custody. So there was a big argument, and I remember my mom telling me that she had heard through the family that her father's mother wanted custody because of the police pension, but who knows,
Have you tried looking at court records?
I have not. I'm just now starting a serious search.
Yeah, because if there was any sort of guardianship involved, there would probably be some court records, and that might provide some interesting information.
So so first of all, like I've got the name of the school and I got the school record, and from what my mom told me, I have her wedding pictures and things like that, and her ration card from World War II while my dad was in the war. So would I go to Family Search to continue this? Would that be the easiest?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I always tell everybody they've collected information from their family and they have these bits and pieces. And what you really want to do is, I hate to keep going back to the census, but making sure that you look at all of the census records to try to find your family in a particular place in a particular time. And the questions that the various census records ask can give you clues not only about their lives and their timeline, but can give you clues on different types of records to look for. I mean, I would get the basics done first before I started to delve into court records, because I'll tell you one thing, I lived in Queens for 30 years, and I did some genealogy work when I was down there. And the municipal archives may be the repository that would have the information that you're looking for. And it's just very difficult to deal with those people. So I would only go to them when I absolutely had to. So, you know, if I were you, I would search everything that's available, you know, that's readily available online. And then what you do is you start to kind of winnow down to these kind of, you know, records that are specific to, you know, what happened to your ancestor in their lives. So if your grandmother or your mother had this particular, you know, this was going on in her life, you know, you want to fill in everything, and then, okay, we know that this specific thing happened, and court records would be the best place to go. That's when you start to look. And when you have as much information as you can possibly gather, when you go to those very specific types of collections, it can be easier for you to interpret the information, to find the information. So I would recommend starting with the foundation, starting with the basics, and then moving on from there.
Okay, thank you. This is really helpful.
Good, good.
Thanks, Holly. We have one last one, unless, Sue Tanner, you had another question? I think you can speak if you want.
Okay. This was actually just going to be a comment if anybody's still listening that were inquiring about Scotland. Because there were a few questions. Or am I speaking to just Holly?
No, we're hearing you. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so I've been to Scotland, not for genealogical research, but current day family has a place there. And I've read a lot about particularly the Highlands of Scotland and the clearances. I was just going to recommend, or not even recommend, but just like as far as research, when the clearances doing to the hierarchy of the dukes in the northern part of Scotland, basically kicked everybody out and said, go to Canada, Australia, and some got to America and South America. I'm pretty sure a lot of people took on an adoption of the name for their last name of where they came from. I've just read a lot, and just thinking, if you're from Scottish background, look about, you know, your name or names involved, and see if you can find a location that they may have come from.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, you can also, you're trying to do sort of a surname analysis of a country, you know, and when you really like, I did this for Ireland. Sorry. Because I had some relatives in Ireland and I wasn't exactly sure where they came from. And you can, there are, I want to say the Irish Times used to have a really good web page that would give you an idea about, you know, the family surnames and where the highest population of that surname was in Ireland. I'm sure they must have something similar for Scotland, but it really, again, you know, going back to Family Search and their wiki page, if you want to search that kind of stuff, you go to, you know, you look up Scotland and see the kind of resources that are available out on the internet that can help you if you really just cannot find, you know, searching US records, you really just cannot find out where the person originated from, then there have to be some other clues that can get you over there, although it's very difficult. But yeah, a surname analysis would be the best way to go. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
This was great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you too, very much. There I am. Holly, very interesting. I want you to know that almost everybody stayed to the very end.
Oh, that's great.
And that says something about how the topic and how interesting and helpful you were to everybody. So thanks one more time, and
absolutely. And I hope people come on the 16th. I'd love to be able to see them.
Yes, Yes.
Okay,
Okay, I'm going to stop recording now and end the meeting. Thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.